Robert and Clara lived in Willow Creek, a quiet town tucked between rolling hills and a lazy river. They had been married for 22 years, and every morning Robert still kissed Clara's forehead before leaving for the lumber mill where he had worked since he was 18. Clara kept the home fires burning. She baked bread that perfumed the whole street, sewed curtains from thrift store fabric, and read aloud to their daughter, Grace, every night. Their love was the kind people wrote songs about, steady, unhurried, and deep. They met in 10th grade, in the school library that smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Robert was the star pitcher on the baseball team, broad-shouldered and shy off the field. He had flunked 2 algebra quizzes in a row and was staring at a page of equations like they were written in ancient runes. Clara, the bookish girl with ink-stained fingers and wire-rimmed glasses, sat across the table correcting her English essay in red pen. "Need a hand?" she asked, not looking up. Robert slid the worksheet toward her. "I'd owe you my life." She explained slopes and intercepts the way other people told fairy tales. By the time the bell rang, he understood, and he was halfway in love. They studied together every Tuesday after that. He brought her wildflowers from the railroad tracks. She lent him novels that made him cry in the dugout. Senior year, under the bleachers after the championship game, he kissed her for the first time. "Marry me someday, Clara Hayes," he whispered. She laughed and said, "Only if you promise to read every book I give you." He kept that promise for the rest of his life. They married the summer after graduation in the little white church on Maple Street. Clara wore her mother's reworked lace gown. Robert's suit was borrowed from his older brother. The reception was potluck in the park, fried chicken, 7-layer salad, and a lopsided cake Clara baked herself. That night they moved into a tiny rented house with creaky floors and a single rose bush by the door. Robert painted the kitchen sunflower yellow because Clara said it made her happy. Grace arrived 3 years later, a squalling miracle with her mother's dark curls and her father's stubborn chin. Robert built a crib from scrap pine at the mill. Clara stitched a quilt from Robert's old team jerseys. They rocked their daughter to sleep on the porch swing, counting stars and making plans. "We'll take her to the ocean one day," Robert said. "And to every library between here and there," Clara added. Life was modest but rich. Robert rose early, kissed Clara while the coffee brewed, and came home smelling of sawdust and honest sweat. Clara turned their backyard into a jungle of tomatoes, zinnias, and snap peas. Grace grew like a weed, first steps, first words, first scraped knee. On Fridays, they ate homemade pizza and watched old movies on a second-hand TV. Robert read aloud from whatever book Clara pressed into his hands. Treasure Island, Little Women, later Harry Potter when Grace begged for magic. Then the mill shut down. One gray Tuesday, the foreman posted the notice: foreign competition, rising costs, doors closing in 30 days. Robert came home with the news clenched in his fist. Clara was rolling pie crust. Flour dusted the air like snow. "We'll be okay," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "We've got each other." But the bills didn't care about love. The mortgage, the truck payment, Grace's braces, everything loomed. Robert took odd jobs, fixing roofs, hauling scrap, anything that paid. Clara sold baked goods at the farmer's market and mended neighbors' clothes for grocery money. Grace, now 15, started babysitting and tutoring middle school math. They ate a lot of beans and cornbread that winter. Robert found steady work at a construction firm 2 towns over. Longer hours, harder labor, but a paycheck again. Slowly the panic eased. They paid the back taxes, replaced the truck's bald tires, and surprised Grace with a second-hand laptop for her birthday. To celebrate, they booked a week at a weathered beach cottage 3 hours away, the first real vacation of their lives. The ocean was everything they'd dreamed. Grace body surfed until her lips turned blue. Clara collected shells in a mason jar. Robert built towering sandcastles complete with moats and driftwood drawbridges. At night, they roasted marshmallows and told ghost stories until the fire burned low. "This is the good life," Robert said, his arm around Clara as the waves sang them to sleep. A month after they returned, Clara woke with a headache that felt like an axe behind her eyes. She laughed it off, too much sun, not enough water. But the pain returned, fiercer, accompanied by dizziness and blurred words. The local clinic sent her to a neurologist in the city. The MRI lit up like a cruel constellation. Glioblastoma. Aggressive. Inoperable in the truest sense, though they could try surgery to buy time. Robert drove her to every appointment, holding her hand so tightly the nurses noticed the white marks on her skin. Grace sat in waiting rooms doing homework, pretending not to cry. They shaved a strip of Clara's hair for the craniotomy. Robert saved the dark curls in a small wooden box. The surgeon removed what he could, but the tumor had fingers in too many places. Radiation, chemotherapy, experimental drugs. Clara endured them all with the same quiet grace she'd shown teaching Robert long division. At home, Robert learned to change IV bags and crush pills into applesauce. He bathed her when her legs forgot how to stand, carried her to the porch swing on warm evenings so she could still feel the breeze. Grace read aloud now, Jane Austen mostly, because Clara said Mr. Darcy's voice soothed her. Neighbors brought casseroles and sat vigil. The rosebush by the door bloomed defiantly, red as wedding silk. One October night, the hospice nurse warned them the end was near. Clara's eyes, once bright as river stones, had gone soft and distant. Robert climbed into the hospital bed beside her, careful of tubes and wires. Grace curled on her mother's other side. "Remember the beach," Clara whispered, her voice thin as onion skin. "Every grain of sand," Robert answered. "I want you to go back, build bigger castles. Teach Grace to drive the truck, read all the books." Tears tracked down Robert's cheeks onto the pillow. "I can't do this without you." "You already are," she said, and managed the smallest smile. "Love isn't a place you stay, Robbie. It's a road you keep walking." Grace pressed her face into her mother's shoulder. "I love you, Mom." "I love you bigger than the sky," Clara murmured. Then, so softly only Robert heard, "Don't let the garden die." She slipped away just before dawn, the monitors sighing into silence. Robert held her until the nurse gently pried his fingers loose. Grace sobbed until there was nothing left but hiccups. Outside, the first frost silvered the grass. The funeral was simple, like their wedding. Same little church, same potluck reception. They buried Clara beneath a young dogwood tree in the town cemetery. Robert placed the mason jar of beach shells in the casket. Grace tucked in the quilt square. She'd been sewing in secret, tiny embroidered books and baseballs. Winter came hard. The house echoed. Robert burned toast and forgot laundry in the washer. Grace skipped school twice, came home with purple streaks in her hair and a defiant glare. One night she screamed, "You're not even trying," and locked herself in her room. Robert sat on the hallway floor until sunrise, head in hands, listening to her cry through the door. Spring thawed the ground and slowly their hearts. Robert took Grace to the nursery and let her pick every flowering plant she wanted. They turned the entire backyard into Clara's garden, roses, lilies, snapdragons, and a whole bed of sunflowers that grew taller than the fence. Grace planted a sign in the middle, Clara's place. They watered, weeded, and talked to the flowers the way Clara had talked to her bread dough. Robert started reading again, aloud on the porch swing the way Clara used to. Grace joined him some nights, knees drawn up, listening to stories of pirates and governesses. She aced her algebra final and made the varsity softball team as shortstop. On weekends they drove to the beach, just the two of them. Robert taught her to skip stones. She taught him to use the new smartphone she'd saved up for. They built sandcastles with moats so deep the tide couldn't breach them. Years slipped by. Grace left for college on a partial scholarship, studying literature and marine biology, Clara's books, Robert's ocean. She came home every break with armloads of laundry and new stories. Robert kept the garden thriving. The sunflowers now brushed the gutters. He fixed trucks for neighbors, coached Little League, and never missed a Sunday visit to the cemetery. He told Clara everything. The funny things Grace said, the way the roses bloomed early, how he finally understood pride and prejudice. One summer evening, Grace brought home a quiet young man named Leo who loved poetry and could quote Neruda by heart. They sat in the garden drinking iced tea while fireflies blinked like slow lightning. Robert watched his daughter laugh the way Clara used to, head thrown back, whole body in on the joke, and felt something loosen in his chest. Later, when the stars came out, Robert walked alone to the sunflower bed. He touched a velvet petal still warm from the day. "She'd be proud of us, wouldn't she?" he asked the night. A breeze stirred the leaves, and for a moment he smelled warm bread and lemon polish. He smiled, eyes wet but unafraid. Love, he understood now, was never the house they lost or the mill that closed. It was the road they kept walking together, then apart, then together again in memory and garden dirt and every story read aloud under a shared sky. Clara walked it still, in Grace's stubborn chin, in the scent of roses at dusk, in the steady beat of Robert's heart that refused to quit. Their love had not ended. It had only changed shape, like water poured from cup to river to sea. And every year, when the sunflowers turned their faces to the light, Robert knew she was there, smiling the way she had the first time he asked for help with algebra, patient, luminous, eternal. If this story touched you, like it, share it, live it. Love doesn't die, it grows where you plant it. See you in the garden.